Hello. Today we have a lady that I have a lot of respect for, uh, Beth Ryan, or we call her, sort of one of the leading champions in microfinance and financial inclusion. She has author of more than three books around investments and the history of some of the microfinance, which was really the mothership of impact investing. She was the lead at USAID initially in the initial years for microfinance, and then she, went on to Accion and had really opened new paths for Accion. Accion was very Latin America focused, and Beth initiated the expansion into India, um, and to open the path to Asia as well. She also founded the Center for Financial Inclusion as an expert in microfinance and financial inclusion, which remains an important voice in the industry. So, I think Beth is really a very important part of the initial growth of microfinance, which of course is now, expanded into impact investing. So welcome, Beth. Nice to see you today.
Thank you, Asad. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Great. So Beth, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about, how your interest in your childhood and where you got the sort of exposure to issues of poverty and microfinance, and maybe a bit of your history would be nice to know.
Sure. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, in a very Southern family. My family was very active in the civil rights struggle. And so they had a strong, social orientation for righting the wrongs that were prevalent in our society. And so maybe that's where my orientation came from. And maybe a second piece was that I used to play geography with my dad, and I would get out the atlas while he was cooking supper. He was the cook in our family. And he would quiz me, like, what's the longest river in France? And which is further north?
And you probably had to prepare for that too.
Well, I had the atlas, so I could look it up. But
so he just asked the question, and then you sort of gave the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was fun. I mean, we just talked about what was going on in these countries. He taught geography at William and Mary.
Oh, okay.
And that spurred my interest in international, I think.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the deep roots that led me there.
Right. So then where did you go to school, and what was your first job, and how did you transition through
Well,
that?
I also had an experience after. So I wanted to do something in the poverty alleviation realm, and I started by working for Action for Boston Community Development, which is the local, anti-poverty agency in Boston. And I found that the racial politics the racial politics in Boston at that time in the mid to late 70s, it was awful. And I really was discouraged by it. It was like people were just hating on each other so badly that I didn't want to have anything to do with that. But I still was cared about poverty issues. I ended up going to the Kennedy School at Harvard and getting a degree in public policy. And it was still domestic, but then I got married to someone who worked for the World Bank, and we were posted to Kenya right away after we got married. And so that was like an immediate immersion in international development, and that's what really took root there.
Great, nice. And then in Kenya, did you start with Accion, or
I started with USAID in Kenya?
Okay, USAID, yeah.
So I got a position with USAID
And what was microfinance at that time? That when you which year are you
I
talking?
started at USAID in Kenya. It was about 1985, I think.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
at that time, there was no such thing as microfinance. It was
Yes.
small enterprise development.
No.
And the whole focus was very highly subsidized, very few loans. They basically didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the repayment rates were abysmal.
Mm.
And it just really wasn't having much of an impact.
Yeah.
But that was also about the time when they started, Grameen Bank started to be known. Accion did a number of really cool experiments in Brazil and El Salvador and Dominican Republic. And there started to become some know-how about how to lend to low-income people.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of microfinance. And so I really got into it at the very beginning.
So there's, always that story that between Accion and Grameen that it was, Accion also in Latin America, had started microfinance lending, right? There was some successes, many apparents. Do
Mm-hmm.
you remember? So what do you know what that was that you did in 1971, if I remember correctly, the year that Accion did? Or was that before
Well,
you?
there was a series of things, but I think it really boiled down to the real turning point. Accion did some of that same kind
Yeah.
of not very good small enterprise development work. But there was the project called Pisces. It was a USAID project, and it was headed by Jeff Ash.
Yeah.
And he went around and studied Latin America and in the Philippines, and he discovered that there were some programs that some organizations that were actually lending on a business-like basis to small enterprises, and they were getting their money back. And so he started trying to understand how
Yeah.
they worked. And so then they tried it all out in the Dominican Republic with a program aimed at lending to the tricicleros, who are little bicycles vendors.
Three-wheeler bicycles, not motorized.
Right, not motorized. They're vendors.
Mm.
And they just learned that people will pay their loans back. They learned about they used peer lending to group lending and with peers to incentivize loans to get back. They went further down. They didn't require business plans. They just lent the money because you could see that the person had an ongoing operation. So suddenly, because the costs were so much lower than they had been and the repayment rates were good, you could start thinking of it as a cost recovery business that could become ultimately a profitable business. So the way that Accion evolved was to develop that to a point where in the early 90s, you could think about creating a Banco Sol, taking one of the NGOs that had done microfinance and converting it into a commercial bank. So while keeping the focus on micro enterprises. So that was the sort of Accion model, was these things can be real financial institutions. They can be big, they can recover their costs, and that's the ticket for being able to serve a whole lot of people, not just 1,000 people, but 1,000,000 people.
Yeah. And that really thesis proved to be right, because in Latin America and Pakistan, you and I have seen where banks mostly weren't engaged in microfinance. And now, every place you go, the banks have a microfinance window. So, that thesis.
Well, I don't know. Some banks have a microfinance window, but I think bigger success has been more banks that are more specialized and focus on that. But today, 400 million people at least are served by those institutions that use microfinance methods and specialize in that method. Those clients.
Right, and I think the the sector as a whole has so many learnings for the growth of impact investing. Now, it seems like I was talking to Elizabeth Littlefield, and she talked about how, through impact investing, somehow everybody thinks that everything is going to be commercially solvable. And while, of course, that is the bigger scale of things, but there are efforts that are more, grassroots level or innovative ideas that need some support and subsidization. So how did, I presume Accion did both, right? Or was it only commercial?
Well, Accion started by that as the way Accion started was to create local NGOs in each country in Latin America, and so those NGOs began to build microfinance programs. There are tens of thousands of clients in each country, and then when Banco Sol which was in Bolivia, was the first one that converted, then the others began to convert. Yeah. Not all of them have converted even today. Some still are NGOs.
Yeah. Then their CEO died, right? Kurt.
Unfortunately, he was a casualty.
He was young man. He wasn't that old, right?
He was, I think he was in his early 50s.
Yeah.
And he was an athlete. So it was really shocking.
You should go out and have a cigarette and drink. It doesn't matter.
He was a big tennis. He played tennis.
I know, he's a nice guy.
High level.
So I mean, I guess you've said a lot of defined in your story a lot of the history of microfinance in terms of the your initiative at USAID in terms of small enterprise, and what do we call small enterprise development?
It used to be small enterprise development.
And through the commercialization of Banco Sol. But where do you think you feel, the biggest achievements, you felt that they were so critical, like you expanding into India? Would you share some of your successes and some
personal
of your
ones?
Sorry?
I mean, if you think about personally, I'm just going to speak personally here.
Yeah, speak personally.
What I feel most proud of when I think about my career.
Yes, exactly.
There's two things. One is that when microfinance started, it didn't have any legitimacy. It was like, oh, you're making these loans to these tiny street vendors, and who cares about them? We want to build businesses, we want businesses that are going to grow. And it was like, no, look where people are. This is where the vast majority of people are. They are running tiny income generating enterprises. And then they were also dismissed because they must be bad risks, and it's too expensive to reach them.
Yeah.
And I think that our role at USAID and my role in writing about microfinance was important in helping people to see that it really was a legitimate thing to do. It had the potential for growth. It had the potential for success. And here is the path that could be taken. So that's one. But the other one was sort of like, that was so successful that people became greedy. And microfinance went under a lot of criticism because it was taking too much money, and too many investors were coming in just wanting to chase returns. And at that point, it was the second thing I was really proud of, which is the creation of the SMART campaign to really say consumer protection. We need to do right by consumers, and let's look at the microfinance industry and make sure that it is a champion for consumer protection. And of course, Asad, you were important in that because you're the one that brought everybody together at the Bocantico meeting. Right. And that was really that sort of coming together was what enabled us to start the SMART campaign and then run it for the next 10 years to embed client protection principles into the industry. Those are my two things.
Those are big ones, right? To provide legitimacy and then to provide the consumers. They're, I think, fundamentally important building grounds for this industry. But I just want you to know what I learned from you and microfinance. I went to the off-grid solar industry, and Michael and I wrote the first draft of the code of conduct for the off-grid solar. Of course, Gogla then took it over and did a great job of making it better. But we initiated it, and we're very proud of that as well. So and that carries on.
Yeah, that's great.
Be standing on somebody else's shoulders, right? One of the things that I think, then when we were talking about the Latin American, the right to who was the first in microfinance sort of discussion, there was a bit of rivalry between, I think it was not nasty, but there was a little bit of competition between Accion and Grameen, and the idea of even, the name was debated, microcredit versus microfinance. And what impact do you think that had on development, or is it still in other sectors as well, that there's between the the organization, there's a human element to it. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it was unnecessary and it was not helpful.
Yes.
It would have been better if look at any kind of movement that gets caught up in infighting.
Yeah.
It wasn't helpful for the movement overall. But one thing, it was philosophical in between something that would become commercial, and then Muhammad Yunus's vision for commercial was, it's commercial in terms of operating on business-like basis, but nobody should be making money off of it. So no profits should be coming into investors' hands. It should stay in the business.
The organization.
So that was the philosophical difference. But there was a political issue. It all got connected into this political fight, which was essentially led by Results and Sam Daly Harris at the Microcredit Summit campaign, because his thing is influencing legislatures, influencing development banks. And so he was really a Grameen Bank supporter, and he wanted the Grameen model. And one of the weird things about the whole rivalry is that because Grameen operated in Bangladesh and it was very poor, loan sizes were very small. In Latin America, where Accion was working, loan sizes were much bigger because the whole economy was much bigger.
Second world versus third world.
There were, right. So Sam's and Results' big waving the flag was USA should not allow any microfinance loans that are bigger than $300. And in Latin America, that was sort of a minimum size at the time. And so they essentially were attempting to get this into legislation. Accion was resisting, and it was quite
hot, rightly so, really,
hot and heavy for a long time. But I will say that at a certain point, Maria Otero at Accion and Alex Counts at Grameen Foundation really reached out to each other and said, let's live with each other. Positive. And that was really after when it was no longer so much of a political fight and was much more a focus of, the focus was much more, how does this industry evolve? And there was more convergence of models, but there were still differences in terms of sort of how much to embrace the commercial model.
Right. Yeah, now there's a lot of memories there. A
lot of memories, but I don't know if it's relevant now.
Yeah. What was it? The three we had? Yeah, I think some of it is relevant. But
the $300 loans, is the relevance there is that the Results and the Microcredit Summit campaign were always insistent on go and reach out to the people who are really poor.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's,
Yeah, no,
a
I
good thing
remember
to
that
focus
debate.
on.
Poorest of the poor, that was the idea, and some was just, start with the low-hanging fruit, and all those debates there. Uh, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the challenges in the industry, because they are still, microfinance is the biggest part of impact investing, really. The impact investing, what I would like to start calling it is the proactive social investments rather than impact investing, because impact investing is they're recasting a lot of conventional financing. So what do you see as the challenges in the industry at your time when you were sort of actively, and I'm not sure how active you are now, but I know you're doing a lot of nice art that's in the background, and I still love that man in the background, although you say it's a tree. I think the audience will agree it's a tree, it's a man. Yeah, it's a different interpretation. But anyway, can you talk about that? I mean, what role the development bank played, and what the challenges were, and with foundations, and what the struggle was in terms of Accion, resources, and as the founder of the Center for Financial Inclusion, how did you see those challenges, and what do you think we can do to create greater efficiency and improvement? It's a big question, so I'll let you speak
Yeah, it's
for.
sort of all over the
Yeah.
place. Um, I think,
Well, why don't we narrow it down? Okay,
okay.
what do you think has been the role of development bank in microfinance? Maybe we start what they have achieved, and
Okay,
then
I
we
know
can talk
what I
about.
wanted to say is the development of microfinance and the success of microfinance was unique in a couple of respects. One is that it is actually possible to build a commercially viable business based on lending to very poor entrepreneurs. And that's not true for all of the things that impact investors want to do. I do think it's true in the energy sector, so that's great. In the health sector, it's maybe a little harder. And in some other environmental protection areas, it's also harder. But anyway, that was just a big boost. That microfinance had is that it was fairly simple, straightforward to build a business.
Yeah,
But the
and the
other thing,
development banks reacted to that and started supporting
yes,
microfinance,
but
right?
they were slow.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, IFC likes to say, and IFC has made huge investments in microfinance over the years. And in fact, I was just a peer reviewer for an evaluation of the World Bank's financial inclusion work
yeah,
during the last 10 years. And among the most successful projects
yeah,
in the field of financial inclusion were microfinance investments by
yeah,
IFC.
yeah,
Those
yeah.
succeeded. Oops.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think the important point is that they played a very important role, right? I mean, the development banks in terms of
But really, if
furthering.
you look back at who created the microfinance world,
Yeah,
um, it was foundations,
yeah,
it was USAID, and it was the IDB. All of them were really important funders.
yeah,
And so the development banks, I mean, IDB more as a grant maker.
yeah, yeah. Grand side of
So
that.
the actual investment was a second tier. But here's what I wanted to say about this is that one of the other advantages that microfinance had that made it work as an impact investment is that the institutions it was working with came out of a social tradition. So they started as NGOs and became financial institutions. And there was a strong, strong ethic of, or strong commitment to social good and
Justice,
social
yes,
benefit.
yes,
And so when you come along with consumer protection, or you come along with um, some kinds of standards related to social impact, the microfinance industry had that as part of its DNA. because
Yeah.
of where it came
Yeah,
from.
that's an important point. And I think that, yes, you're right that foundations and others were the ones. But I think the role, I would say, of development banks was also the growth and the more, sort of
Yes.
commercialization
Yeah.
of microfinance was really spurred by the development banks, I would say, right? I mean, if you look at
Yes, the amount of money that could
pro
come in.
credit, right, was so because of KfW's support, right? I mean, that was basically they, I'm saying they have equity investments in so many
No,
sectors.
you're right. You're right. I guess I don't give them as much credit because they weren't there at the very beginning. But
Yeah,
then when they
yeah,
did come in,
yeah,
and then they also played, like I remember I was involved in starting up what is now Accion Microfinance Bank in Nigeria.
yeah,
And if the IFC hadn't been there, it never would have
yeah,
taken off.
yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think the say it took a long time, right? I mean, look, in this world, which is our only planet, the crises and challenges are increasing. The interest in impact investing is increasing. So the development banks have to adopt to that change. And I think that to me is very important. Yeah, so I think, that I presume your challenges, you said they were very slow. It's the same challenge now. They're very slow, um, and maybe overly thorough, in some ways as
Well,
well.
overly bureaucratic, I do. I mean,
Yeah,
that's true.
right,
You
right.
got
Because you have
any?
so many layers of approvals, and I
Yeah,
think,
but you can't blame them in particular because governments, all kinds of government, public sector institutions are way too bureaucratic. I don't think it's
yes,
development banks are unique in that respect.
yes. So then I think there needs to be some sort of development bank that is private sector led, right? That's what IFC is supposed to be, right? Or DEG and places like that. Yeah,
Yeah, but they
I mean,
can't
I guess
be.
I sort of also, since your root was in the foundations that had given you, what role they played in your creation of the Center for Financial Inclusion, and where do you think do you think they're as slow as development banks and as bureaucratic, or
No, 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 no. The
yeah,
level of speed and bureaucracy at the foundations, at all of the foundations, is much, much less. As soon as you say that it's a public sector institution, you know you've got to struggle through layers and layers of things. And that is just not true, even for, I think, people complain about the Gates Foundation being bureaucratic, but the Gates Foundation is so much less bureaucratic than
yeah,
USAID or yeah, but I think the problem that I see with foundations at this point is that they are too founder led,
yeah,
and that rather, my philosophy when I was a donor at USAID was find people who are doing things you like and support them,
hmm,
period. And now that, a lot of the foundations are very much more directive. And I don't think that's healthy because they're not on the ground. Um,
yeah. No,
and
so they
yeah,
don't have a sense. When you say directive, could you explain what that means?
they have a much they have a much more specific idea of what they want to see.
Yeah, so they have the
And
solution before being on the ground.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's
The scopes
often
are very
it's
narrowly
often
defined.
it's
It's very
often
difficult.
it's often the founder who's calling the shots.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, that's
I don't
true for
think that's
small
healthy.
foundations, right? But larger foundations, like
Well,
the
you have an earlier generation of foundations like Ford and Rockefeller,
yeah,
which are operate more kind of broadly, but
yeah,
the any foundation that's really focused on an individual, I mean, you got to hand it to uh, Bezos's wife. I can't think of her name right now.
yeah. I know. I see her face. She's done a lot for
McKinsey.
charity, right?
Well,
Catherine,
she
or
has that
yeah,
philosophy that I agree with: is find
yeah.
people you like and just let them support them to do what they do best.
Good. I mean, I think maybe we can talk a little bit more about the future, how do you see us in this? The growth of the sector is clear. There's a lot of recasting that's clear. But Leapfrog closed $1 billion fund. That's amazing. $1 billion fund. And of course, they're making 60, $70 million investments, but Andrew,
That's amazing. Yeah,
leaps
that's
every
great.
year, and he's done a great job with that. But yeah, so what are your, views on the future? Where do you see this industry going, and where would you like to see it going?
I mean, I don't have, I don't focus on the industry itself. I guess I have one thing to say about sort of the way the industry works, which is that I really don't like what I see when I see these principles of responsible investing being used as greenwashing. And I think that that it's coming home to roost, because there's too much window dressing and not enough reality behind the social side of the impact investment industry. And I don't have a solution for that. I don't know what the solution is, but clearly it threatens the credibility of impact investing to not have reality behind it. And I guess the only other thing I would say is I think financial inclusion and fintech and all of that, that's done. Just invest in climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think
so you see the climate becoming more important in the future.
Climate is going to be the story of the next 50 years. And if so, all of the focus should be there.
Yeah, right.
And it's not like you're moving away from supporting the poor, because climate is going to make a lot of people really
it's worse from developing countries in Pakistan, that's very
so I definitely, there's such a vested interest by organizations in sticking with the sector that they know. And I kind of just think that the financial inclusion and fintech sectors, they've accomplished their purpose. They've, maybe not 100% of their purpose, but
they still need to grow.
It's a huge difference from the way it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
In terms of access to finance by ordinary people. And so let's move on to where the crisis really is.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Some people say they're working in climate, and then you say, well, I have this project in Africa, and they say, no, we're just working in climate in the US. And I say, well, yeah, sure, but if you just float above your house, and then you float above another 100 feet, you start to see your neighborhood. And if you float up enough, you'll see the earth. So environment is not geographically, specific. It influences around the world. But it would be, great to hear your advice to my audience, who's probably younger and starting out in this industry. What would you say to them, and what is your word of wisdom to a person interested or working in this sector?
Yeah, well, I think I've already kind of made my views clear, which is, make sure that the social side is real and isn't just a set of numbers that you report to somebody, and go for climate, go for energy transformation and climate mitigation and adaptation. That's, I have to say that I started at the very beginning of microfinance, and it was like getting up on a surfboard and riding this big wave.
Yeah.
So from a career perspective, it was really rewarding to do that. And, climate's not at the beginning, but it's certainly going to be a tidal wave. And any young person who gets in early and really develops an expertise and knows where that sector needs to go can have a fabulous career.
Yeah, and I think the problem is the current situation in Israel and the senseless killings, really, or terrorism in Israel, and what's happening to the Palestinian, and similarly, I think they are also living in terror. It's just it sort of says how development without democracy and development without the rule of law, I don't think we're ever going to get development because of the corruption level of, political manipulation. So what do you think about the link between development and, fundamental democracy and rule of law sort of ideas?
Yeah, well, we are clearly living in a time when the world is becoming less stable as a result of various things, but these things that certainly what's happening in Israel and Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the United States House of Representatives.
Yes, and in
some of the noises that
Armenia as well, right?
Yes.
And
there's,
Kurds.
These are at this stage, they don't prevent development in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so, but it's true that you really just can't make progress when you are overwhelmed with conflict. And I do think we have the opportunity to continue to work on development in the vast majority of the world. And let's get on with it. And the better you do that, I think it does help build groundwork for stability.
Yeah.
It is a scary, scary time.
Yeah, no, I know. And I think the fundamentals of the American beliefs in freedom and, is really, I think it's the idealism that we all inspired to, really. I mean, when I first came, I was like, oh, America is the guardian, the, standard bearer and all that. And, look at, our country is totally divided, as you said, and there's no leadership. Who's leading the world, right? I'm not sure. Yes, but it's a pleasure. I'm sure I can talk to you another hour, Elisabeth, because there's so many stories and so many, sort of human elements in the development of the industry.
Well, can I just tell the Pocantico story really quickly?
Yeah, sure. That I'll make sure it gets stays.
Your readers may not know this story. But Asad was seeing this struggle between commercial microfinance and accusations that it was getting too commercial and what are we going to do about it? And he had the foresight and the leadership to call together a group of about 50 of the top leaders in the field, from investing, from development organizations, from NGOs, and they all came together at Pocantico, which is in a convention area that used to belong to the Rockefellers. And at that point, people really came together and said, we need to make sure that microfinance evolves in a way that maintains its social component. So he was really an inspirational leader in that.
No, it's what I learned in microfinance, what I learned there, I brought it to the off-grid solar sector. Just this April, we gathered the solar industry, which is going through a similar crisis. I think it's the most robust of the development sector in terms of energy and, companies with revenues of $100 million. But, they had 12 of its top companies were restructured. Then you had the COVID crisis, then, equity dried up. So we have a real challenge. And so we convened the industry in a similar way, what we did. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of nice to learn from what you've done.
To talk about it. Getting people together in a good setting to really figure out what to do is
that's maybe what we should do with these with these combatants. God knows. Anyway, thank you so much and have a great weekend. And I'll send you this in due course. Bye. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Same here.
Yeah.